Are you serious, Gunnery Sergeant? Colonel Marcus Thorne's voice was a blade cutting through the dry desert air. He gestured with his chin toward the young woman standing patiently by the range check-in desk. You're telling me this lady wants to qualify on the M40A6? The disbelief dripped from his words, thick and oily. The general froze. The pen in his hand stopped moving. He slowly lifted his head, his eyes widening as the name registered. He stared at his master sergeant, searching his face for any sign this was a joke. Gunny Miller just called me from the range. CROSS. It's her, sir. General Peterson's entire demeanor changed. The annoyed administrator vanished, replaced by the warrior. He rose from his chair, his movement suddenly crisp and urgent. He looked at his master sergeant, and for the first time, Davis saw a flicker of something that looked like fear in his commander's eyes. Frank, the general said, his voice a low command. Get my vehicle and get the sergeant major. Now, tell them to skip the sirens. We go quiet. Back at the range, Colonel Thorne was basking in his perceived victory. He had restored order. He had made his point. He paced before the assembled Marines, a swagger in his step. Let that be a lesson for all of you, he announced, his voice carrying across the silent firing line. This is an elite institution. There is no room for sentimentality. There is no room for civilians pretending they belong here. The standards are the standards for a reason. Adriana Cross was sitting on the bench where Gunny Miller had left her, sipping from a bottle of water he'd brought. She seemed perfectly content to wait, her gaze still fixed on the distant hills beyond the range. Thorne, not satisfied with his victory, decided he needed one final definitive act. He strode over to Adriana, his shadow falling over her. I thought I told you to leave, Thorne said, his voice cold. The gunnery sergeant asked me to wait, Adriana replied calmly. He did he? Thorne sneered. Well, I'm countermanding his request. I'm going to give you 60 seconds to get off my range before I have you cited for trespassing. Perhaps a nice psychological evaluation is in order, thinking you can just walk in here and make demands like some kind of action movie character. We all are sometimes, she said quietly. She looked down at the book in her hand. The trick is to learn, to build something better from the wreckage. She offered him her hand. It was calloused and strong. After a moment's hesitation, Thorne shook it. The final scene is not on a firing range. It's in Adriana's quiet apartment. She is cleaning a rifle at her kitchen table. The movement's automatic and meditative. The old canvas shooting jacket hangs on a hook by the door. Inside, on her dresser, sits the worn, frayed phantom patch in a simple frame beside a photograph of a smiling woman in marine dress blues. Sergeant Lisa Morgan, a silent, humble testament to a promise kept. She has found her peace not in the echo of the rifle, but in the memory of a bond that death could not break. The unassuming hero, once more. The story of Adriana Cross is a powerful reminder that heroes walk among us every day, often in the quietest, most unassuming forms. If you were moved by her story of quiet valor, please like this video, share it with someone who needs to hear it, and subscribe to Veterans Past Stories for more tales of courage and respect. The fallout for Colonel Thorne was swift and silent. He was not publicly reprimanded. The Marine Corps preferred to handle such matters internally. But a week later, his name was on a transfer list. His new assignment was a windowless office in the Pentagon basement, analyzing supply chain logistics for the commissary system. It was a career-ending move, a slow and quiet exile. In his place, General Peterson mandated a new training module for all personnel on base, focused on veteran relations and the institutional memory of the Corps. The first lesson was titled The Phantom of Hathcock Range, and it told the story of Adriana Cross. A few months later, Marcus Thorne, now in civilian clothes, was in a local bookstore. He was browsing the military history section, his mind a million miles away, when he saw a familiar figure by the biography shelf. It was Adriana Cross examining a book about female snipers with gentle focus. Thorne's first instinct was to turn and walk away, to avoid the source of his profound humiliation, but her words on the range echoed in his head. He just made a mistake. He took a deep breath and walked over. Adriana looked up as he approached, her gray eyes calm and recognizing. There was no anger in them, no hint of triumph. Miss Cross, Thorne said, his voice barely a whisper. I just wanted to say I was wrong. It was all he could manage. But it was enough. Adriana looked at him for a long moment. Then a small, sad smile touched her lips. She nodded. General, he just made a mistake, she said, gesturing vaguely in the direction of the retreating colonel. He sees the uniform, not the person. It's an easy mistake to make. She turned her gaze to the young Marines. Remember this, she said, her voice carrying unexpected weight. The uniform changes. The weapons get better. The enemy has a different face. But respect, that's the bedrock. It's timeless. Every person you meet in or out of this Corps is carrying a history you know nothing about. It's better to assume it's a heavy one. The general nodded, humbled by her grace. He then noticed the small frayed patch on Adriana's jacket. Is that an original Phantom Team patch, ma'am? The general asked, his voice filled with a historian's reverence. Adriana touched it gently with her fingertips. Morgan's sister made two. One for her, one for me. The scene dissolved again. Not to the mountainside this time, but to a dusty, sun-drenched forward operating base. A young Lisa Morgan, all smiles and fierce determination, pressed the patch into a younger Adriana's hand. "There," she'd said, grinning. "Now it's official. We're phantoms, Cross. They'll never see us coming." The patch wasn't a trophy of war. It was a promise between sisters in arms, a memorial she'd carried over her heart for 12 years. The general's voice grew even more intense. "She does so by firing a single 10-shot string on Lane 4, the lane they always trained on together. It is a tradition that was approved by the Commandant of the Marine Corps himself. A tradition, Colonel, that you would know about if you spent half as much time reading the operational history of this corps as you do managing your social media presence." The public humiliation of Colonel Thorne was absolute and breathtaking. The young Marines now looked at Adriana with new understanding, with awe. They weren't looking at a civilian anymore. They were looking at a ghost, a living monument to their own highest ideals. They saw the worn jacket not as outdated, but as a holy vestment. They saw the frayed patch and understood it was worth more than any official medal. The general then turned his full, undivided attention to the colonel. The rebuke was not loud, but it was devastating in its precision. "Colonel Thorne, your command of this range is hereby revoked. You will surrender it to Gunnery Sergeant Miller for the remainder of the day. You and I will have a conversation in my office at 1600 hours. I suggest you spend the intervening time reflecting on the Marine Corps values of honor, courage, and commitment, as you have displayed none of them today. You are dismissed." Thorne, his face ashen, could only manage a choked "yes, sir." He turned and walked away, his career in tatters, the eyes of every Marine on him like daggers. Then, in the silence that followed, Adriana Cross finally spoke. She looked at the young Marines, then at the general. Her voice was not triumphant, but soft and full of quiet wisdom. He snapped to the sharpest, most profound salute of his career. It was a salute of utter, unconditional respect. "Miss Cross," General Peterson's voice boomed, full of a deference no one had ever heard from him before. "It is an honor, ma'am. I apologize for the welcome you have received." Adriana simply nodded, a glimmer of understanding in her eyes, and returned a crisp, perfect salute of her own. The crowd of young Marines stared, their minds struggling to process what they were seeing. A two-star general saluting a young civilian woman. Colonel Thorne looked like he'd been turned to stone. The general turned to face the stunned audience. His eyes swept over the young Marines, the NCOs, and finally settled on Colonel Thorne with the force of a physical blow. "For those of you who don't know," the general began, his voice ringing with authority, "you have been standing in the presence of a legend." He gestured toward Adriana. "This is Adriana the Phantom Cross." A wave of whispers rippled through the crowd. The Phantom. It was a name from modern military lore, a sniper who had become a myth in the mountains of Afghanistan and the deserts of Iraq. A woman credited with shots that were technically impossible, who held records set under conditions that most snipers couldn't survive, let alone excel in. They were stories told to inspire young snipers, a benchmark of excellence that no one ever expected to actually meet. "Miss Cross is not here to qualify," the general continued, his voice laced with ice as he looked at Thorne. "She is here, as she has been on this day for the past 12 years, to honor the memory of her spotter, Sergeant Lisa Morgan, who was killed in action on this date in 2013. He was pushing past the point of no return, driven by an arrogance that had become a runaway train. He was so focused on his own power that he didn't hear the soft crunch of tires on the gravel road behind him. He didn't see the black command vehicles pulling to a stop. He didn't see the doors fly open, but everyone else did. The young Marines, Gunny Miller, the range masters, they all saw it. They saw the general's two-star flag on the lead vehicle. They saw General Peterson emerge, his face a thundercloud, followed by the base sergeant major, a man whose scowl could curdle milk. They moved with a speed and intensity that signaled a crisis of the highest order. The entire range fell silent. Every Marine, as if moved by a single nerve, snapped to the position of attention. The sudden unified crack of heels coming together was the only sound. Colonel Thorne finally turned, confused by the sudden silence. His jaw went slack, his face drained of all color. He saw the general and his entourage marching toward him, their eyes burning holes through him. He tried to compose himself, to snap a salute, but he was too slow, too late. General Peterson walked right past him. He didn't spare him a glance, as if the colonel were nothing more than a piece of furniture. He marched directly to the bench where Adriana Cross was slowly getting to her feet. The general stopped 3 feet in front of the young woman, who now stood straight, the casualness gone, replaced by an undeniable presence. Then the two-star general did something that sent a shockwave through the assembled crowd. Master Sergeant Frank Davis slammed the phone down in its cradle, his face pale. For a man who had spent 30 years in the Marine Corps, from the streets of Fallujah to the mountains of Afghanistan, it took a lot to rattle him. But the name Adriana Cross was a lightning strike from a clear sky. It wasn't a name you heard. It was a name you read about in dusty classified after-action reports and whispered about in instructor lounges at Quantico. He didn't walk. He ran. He burst from his office, startling a young corporal, and sprinted down the polished hallway of the command building, his footsteps echoing like gunshots. He didn't bother knocking on the base commander's door. He threw it open, making the two-star general inside look up from his paperwork with a flash of irritation. "Master Sergeant, what is the meaning of this?" General Peterson demanded. "Sir, my apologies, but this is an emergency," Davis said, still breathless. "It's Colonel Thorne, sir, down at the Hathcock Range." The general's expression hardened. "What has Thorne done now?" "He's thrown a civilian off the range, denied her access." Peterson sighed, exasperated. "Frank, I'm busy. Can't this be handled by the provost marshal?" "Sir," Davis said, leaning forward and lowering his voice. "The civilian's name is Adriana Cross." "Sir, it's who he ejected," Miller pressed, his heart pounding. He felt like he was walking a tightrope over a canyon. "The civilian's name is Adriana Cross." Silence. For a full 5 seconds, the only sound was static. Gunny Miller wondered if the call had dropped. Then Master Sergeant Davis's voice came back, but it was completely different. The gruffness was gone, replaced by cold, sharp urgency. "Say that name again, Gunnery Sergeant." "Cross, sir. Adriana Cross." "Spell it." "Cross." Another pause, this one filled with an attention Miller could feel through the phone. "Gunny," Davis said, his voice now dangerously quiet, "keep that woman there. Do not let her leave the base. Use whatever excuse you have to. I don't care if you have to tell her the general wants to personally apologize. Just keep her there. Do you understand me?" "Yes, Master Sergeant," Miller said, stunned. "Good. Help is on the way." The line went dead. Gunny Miller stared at his phone, a sudden chilling realization dawning on him. Colonel Thorne hadn't just made a mistake. He had kicked a hornet's nest. A very, very deadly one. He had his orders from the colonel, but he also had a deeper duty to the Corps and to the warriors who had built it. He made sure Adriana was situated comfortably on a bench in the shade, promising to return with a bottle of water. Then he walked behind the range control tower, pulled out his personal cell phone and scrolled through his contacts. There was one number he kept for absolute emergencies, a direct line to a master sergeant at the base command building, a man who had seen everything and knew everyone. Master Sergeant Davis. He pressed the call button. "Davis," a gruff voice answered. "Master Sergeant, it's Gunny Miller down at the Hathcock Range," he said, keeping his voice low. "Sorry to bother you, sir, but we have a situation." "What is it, Gunny? Did one of your new shooters forget which end the bullet comes out of?" "No, sir. It's Colonel Thorne. He's just ejected a civilian from the range." There was a sigh on the other end. "Thorne is an ass, Miller. We all know it. Why are you calling me about it? File a report." Back on the sun-baked range, Adriana's expression hadn't changed, but Gunny Miller saw the shift in her eyes, the flicker of a fire that had never truly gone out. The colonel's mockery of the patch was the final straw. This was no longer about procedure. It was about desecration. "Colonel, with all due respect," Miller started, but Thorne cut him off. "Are you questioning my order, Gunny?" "No, sir," Miller said, his jaw tight. He gave Adriana an apologetic look. "Ma'am, if you'll follow me." As he began to lead Adriana away, she stopped and turned back to the colonel. "The request was for Lane 4 specifically," Adriana said, her voice even. "It's important." This only enraged Thorne further. The audacity of this young woman to persist. "I don't care if you requested the Oval Office. Your request is denied. This range is for warriors, not for civilians playing dress-up. Get her out of here before I have her cited for trespassing." The humiliation was complete. The crowd of Marines was silent, watching an unknown woman being cast out for reasons they didn't understand. Gunny Miller felt a hot surge of shame. As he walked Adriana toward the parking lot, his mind raced. The sponsorship, the specific request for Lane 4. The young woman's unnerving calm, it didn't add up. He saw a piece of faded cloth on a dusty jacket. The world seemed to fall away for a moment, the harsh sunlight of the range dissolving into thick, humid green. The air was heavy with the smell of rain and decay. A much younger Adriana lay perfectly still in the mud of an Afghan mountainside, the same patch sewn onto her ghillie suit. Wind howled through the rocks above, but she hadn't moved in 16 hours. Her spotter, a tough-as-nails female sergeant named Morgan, lay beside her, whispering coordinates through frozen lips. The patch, hand-stitched by Morgan's sister and sent from home, was a symbol of their two-woman team. They called themselves the Phantoms because they were ghosts. Never seen, only felt. In her mind's eye, Adriana saw the impossible distance to the target, the wind she could feel but not see, and the calm that settled over her as she slowly, gently squeezed the trigger. It was a memory not of glory but of grim, silent duty. It was a deliberate, calculated humiliation wrapped in concern for safety. Adriana slowly, methodically pulled a slim leather wallet from her back pocket. As she opened it, she extended her hands. They were lean, strong, with calluses on the trigger finger and thumb, and there was not a tremor in them. They were as steady as stone. She handed over her driver's license. Thorne glanced at it and scoffed. Adriana Cross. Well, Miss Cross, your field trip is over. I am denying this request on the grounds of safety and operational tempo. Gunnery Sergeant, please escort Ms. Cross off the base. Gunny Miller stood frozen. He looked from the colonel's smug face to Adriana's impassive one. The injustice of it was a physical weight. He had seen the young woman's paperwork. It was not only valid, it was sponsored by a name so high up the chain of command he'd assumed it was a typo. He had brought Adriana here out of a sense of duty, following orders from a superior he'd never met. Now he was being ordered to disrespect a woman who, for reasons he couldn't explain, commanded a deep and instinctual reverence. The young Marines were murmuring now, their smirks replaced with frowns. They knew when an officer was being a leader and when he was being a bully. The colonel's eyes narrowed as he looked at the worn patch on Adriana's jacket again. A final sneer on his face. Some forgotten unit, I suppose. Trying to relive glory days that probably never happened. A bother? Thorne's voice rose. This is the United States Marine Corps Advanced Sniper Range, not a photo opportunity for civilians playing soldier. We have active duty personnel who need this time. We have war fighters to train. We don't have time for whatever this is. The circle of onlookers was growing. Young lance corporals and privates, fresh from boot camp, watched with a mixture of curiosity and secondhand embarrassment. They saw a confrontation between a formidable colonel and a young woman who looked like she belonged at a yoga studio, not a military firing range. Their loyalties were with the rank, but their sympathies were starting to drift. Colonel Thorne seemed to feed on the attention. He was performing now, using the young woman as a prop in a lesson about military seriousness. He tapped a finger on Adriana's worn, faded canvas shooting jacket. It was simple and old-fashioned with leather patches at the elbows and shoulder. It looked completely out of place amidst the digital camouflage and tactical gear. What is this supposed to be? Thorne asked, a smirk playing on his lips. You get this at a vintage store? Trying to look authentic? He flicked a small hand-stitched patch on the jacket's breast. The patch was dark gray, almost black, with a simple silver thread design that was hard to make out. A stylized scope crosshair with wings. It was frayed at the edges, a relic from another time. Adriana's eyes briefly dropped to the patch. A flicker of something deep and distant passed through her gray depths. She said nothing. I need to see your identification again, the colonel demanded, holding out his hand. And I want to see your hands. I need to be sure they're steady enough not to be a danger to my Marines. Sir, Gunnery Sergeant Miller began, his voice tight with a respect the colonel clearly lacked. Miss Cross is a certified civilian marksman. She has all the paperwork. She just requests an hour on lane 4. Thorne let out a short, incredulous laugh. It was a sound that made several young Marines nearby shift uncomfortably. They were waiting for their own range time, and this unexpected delay was turning into a spectacle. The colonel, a man whose reputation was built on logistics and PowerPoint presentations rather than trigger time, clearly saw the young woman as both a bureaucratic nuisance and a personal affront. He thrived on order, on the predictable rhythm of a base running on his schedule. Adriana Cross was an unwelcome variable. Paperwork, Thorne scoffed, snatching the clipboard from Gunny Miller's hand. He scanned the documents with theatrical slowness, his lip curling. This certification is older than most of your enlistment contracts. Look at her, Gunny. He gestured dismissively. She looks like she just stepped out of a fitness influencer video. You want me to hand her a $200,000 rifle system so she can, what? Post selfies with it? The colonel stepped closer to Adriana, his polished boots crunching on gravel. He was taller, radiating an aura of crisp uniforms and self-importance. Adriana didn't flinch. She simply met the colonel's gaze. In that moment, it was unclear who was truly appraising whom. Sir, Adriana said, her voice low and calm, not soft as the colonel might have expected, but measured with an edge of steel beneath. I'm just here to fire a string. I won't be a bother. Adriana Cross, 36 years old, said nothing. She stood with a stillness that seemed unnaturally controlled, her hands clasped loosely behind her back. Her dark hair was pulled back in a severe ponytail, her athletic frame clothed in worn tactical pants and a faded canvas shooting jacket. Her eyes, sharp, gray, and unflinching, were not on the colonel, but on the distant targets shimmering under the California sun. She looked less like a threat and more like someone who'd wandered onto the wrong set of a military documentary.